December 12th, 7:42 a.m. Temperature 34 degrees. Heavy fog had rolled in overnight, clinging low to the earth like a wet blanket. The frost hadn't melted yet. Grass blades stood rigid in silence. There was no wind, just the occasional drip of water falling from roof gutters. The houses on Walnut Street looked identical in the early morning gray. Quiet, trimmed lawns, white fences, mailboxes slightly rusted at the hinges. It was the kind of neighborhood you'd call peaceful, safe, ordinary. At the Yadkin County Sheriff's Department, the first dispatch of the day came in without urgency. A man's voice, anonymous, flat, reported a possible case of animal neglect. "Barking all night," he said. "Smells coming from the backyard. Just thought someone ought to check." Sergeant Thomas McAllister, 60 years old, nearing retirement, was the one who picked up the call. He'd heard it all before. He didn't even bring backup. Just grabbed his thermos of coffee and headed out. Radio crackling softly as he drove the 2 miles across town. When he pulled up outside 1042 Walnut Street, nothing stood out. The lawn had been recently cut. The curtains were drawn. A late model SUV sat in the driveway, clean but not sparkling. There were children's toys scattered near the porch, though they looked untouched, as if placed there more for appearance than use. The mailbox still held yesterday's paper. McAllister walked around the side of the house. His boots crunched softly on frozen grass. The fence was tall, 6 feet at least, and painted white. From the street, nothing behind it was visible. The gate wasn't locked. As he pushed it open, the hinges let out a faint groan. The backyard was eerily still. No barking, no movement. The smell hit him first. Not just animal, sour, human. He hesitated, then moved toward the far corner, where a large, weather-worn wooden kennel sat half buried in leaves and dirt. It was larger than standard, almost like a shed, with a grated metal door affixed to the front. He crouched and shined his flashlight through the bars. That's when he saw the eyes. They blinked once, slowly, like the way a dog might in bright light. But it wasn't a dog. It was a child, a boy, 10, maybe 11, curled in a fetal position, knees drawn to chest, arms crossed tightly over his ribs, bare feet, dirt-smudged legs. A ragged hoodie zipped up to his neck, sleeves too long, frayed at the cuffs. His face was half covered by the hood, but McAllister could see his lips, cracked, pale, and cheeks that looked hollow, sharp. The boy didn't move. McAllister crouched lower. "Hey, son," he said softly. "You okay?" No answer. "You hurt?" Nothing, just the eyes, watching, waiting. McAllister moved closer, pressing his face near the bars. That's when he noticed the chain, a thin metal loop around the boy's ankle, attached to a rung inside the kennel. Not tight enough to injure, but enough to prevent running. The sergeant's mouth went dry. "I'm getting you out," he said. Still no reaction. He reached for the latch. It was rusted, stiff, but it gave way after 2 tries. The door creaked open. The boy flinched, barely, but his arms tightened across his body. McAllister took off his jacket. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." He slid inside, kneeling. "You cold?" Only then did the boy make a sound. A kind of breath, short and dry, almost like a hiccup. His fingers twitched. He didn't pull away when McAllister draped the jacket over his shoulders. He was light, too light. When McAllister lifted him, he expected some resistance, the weight of bone and muscle, but the boy felt like air. Dead weight, hollow. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. As they exited the kennel, the boy blinked against the light. Fog still clung to the yard, but above, the clouds were beginning to thin. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. McAllister carried the boy to the cruiser, opened the back door, and gently set him down on the seat. He closed the door, stood there for a moment, and exhaled through his nose. He radioed dispatch, 1042 Walnut, requesting backup and medical. We have a 1014. Child found in suspected animal enclosure. Male, approximately 10 years old. No visible injuries. Possibly in shock. He paused. And he was chained. Silence on the other end. Then, copy that, Sergeant. Units en route. McAllister looked back through the window at the boy, who sat motionless, eyes fixed forward, not blinking. The jacket had slid off one shoulder, revealing a bruise, faint, yellowing, like something that had been there for weeks. The sergeant turned away and leaned against the car, staring out at the stillness of the neighborhood. Mail still hadn't been picked up. Curtains were still drawn. The town was waking up, but no one had seen a thing. From the street, Yadkinsville looked like the kind of town that made postcards. American flags hung from front porches. Kids rode bikes along sidewalks flanked by maple trees that turned golden in October and shed red by November. Christmas lights were already up on half the houses, even though it was still early December. Every yard had a neatly trimmed lawn. Some had "God Bless America" signs. Others simply had plastic deer statues covered in a fine layer of frost. There was a church on every corner, Baptist, Methodist, even one with a faded sign that just read "Community." On Sundays, the diners filled with laughter and the scent of bacon and coffee. Men in flannel talked about hunting season. Women in scarves discussed pie recipes and grandchildren. No one ever said the word tragedy here. It didn't belong. The town motto, painted in cursive on the side of the welcome sign just off Route 601, read, "Yadkinsville, a safe place to raise a family." Most people believed it. The Harper house sat in the middle of a block of homes that all looked the same. One story, pale siding, two small windows in front, a carport on the side. It was tidy, predictable. The fence around the backyard was taller than most. 6 feet, no gaps between the panels, painted bright white. From the street, it looked like privacy, respectability. No one questioned it. People remembered Monica Harper from the grocery store. Blonde, soft-spoken, always dressed in beige or navy sweaters. She said, "Excuse me and thank you." She smiled, though it rarely reached her eyes. She bought basic things: bread, milk, eggs, sometimes canned soup. No one remembered ever seeing her buy a birthday cake, or school supplies, or toys. Jacob Harper was seen less often. He drove a dark blue SUV, always alone. Clean-shaven, military haircut. He wore the same green jacket, even in summer. He didn't wave, didn't linger. Some folks whispered he'd served in Iraq. Others weren't sure, but he was quiet, not drunk, never loud. That was enough. Neighbors respected space in Yadkinsville. It was considered polite. Not poking your nose in someone else's business was a virtue here. Even when the curtains were always drawn, even when the backyard was off limits, even when the dog barked for hours, especially then. Doris Kincaid lived 2 houses down, 73 years old, retired librarian. She walked her little poodle, Muffin, every morning, rain or shine. She had passed the Harper house 100 times. "I'd see the boy sometimes," she said later, "just a glimpse, through the fence slats. Thought he was maybe 7 or 8. Always looked thin, dirty maybe. But you don't want to jump to conclusions. Kids get messy, boys climb trees. Who am I to say? One morning she'd seen him barefoot. It was cold. Frost still clung to the grass. He stood near the side of the house, holding something that looked like a piece of bread. When he noticed her watching, he stepped back, disappearing behind the fence. She remembered stopping, holding Muffin's leash a little tighter, then telling herself not to be paranoid. You just, you don't want to think the worst. And if you're wrong, you look like a fool or a busybody. It's their house, their child, their business. So she kept walking. So did everyone else. Across the street, the mailman, John Morris, had delivered to the Harpers for 5 years. He never saw a name on the mailbox, just the number. Once he'd left a package by the door and heard a noise inside, like a bark, and then something else, a thud. He hesitated, then shrugged. It's not my place, he later said. I just deliver the mail. Even the garbage collectors had noted the strange smell sometimes. Animal waste, one had reported in a logbook. Back corner, consistent every pickup. No one followed up, not because they didn't care exactly, but because no one believed it was that serious, because nobody wanted it to be. The Harpers didn't host barbecues. They didn't show up at school board meetings. They didn't volunteer at church, but they also didn't cause trouble. They were invisible in the most acceptable way. And Luke wasn't a name anyone in the neighborhood knew. He was a shadow behind the fence, a flicker in the periphery, a maybe. Years later, people would say, I think I saw him once. I had a weird feeling about that place. I thought about calling someone, but they didn't. And that was the whole point. Because Yadkinsville was a safe town, with polite people, with fences and smiles and driveways washed clean every Saturday. Because to admit something was wrong meant admitting they'd ignored it. It was easier not to look too closely. It was easier to believe that everyone here was good, or at least not bad. McAllister, when asked how a child could go unnoticed for so long, would only say, he was always there. He just wasn't seen. He wasn't seen at school, never enrolled, no record, not even homeschooled. He wasn't seen at the doctor's office, no checkups, no vaccinations. He wasn't seen at the park, the library, trick-or-treating on Halloween. But he had been there, 10 years, behind that white fence, in a town that called itself safe, in a town that prided itself on knowing its neighbors. And yet somehow never knew a child lived or survived in a kennel just down the street. He didn't know his age. He thought it might be 10, or maybe 9. He wasn't sure if birthdays counted when no one said anything. Time in the kennel moved differently. It wasn't measured in days or nights, but in cold and hunger. In how many times the metal bowl was filled. In how many times Max whimpered beside him in the dark. There were no clocks, no calendars. The sky was the only thing that changed. Gray, then darker gray, then black. Sometimes blue for a few hours. The color of the sky was the only way Luke knew the world was still spinning. He had stopped thinking in full sentences. His mind worked in fragments. Food, cold, sleep, sound, quiet, pain, and Max. Always Max. Max had been there before him, an old mutt with a cloudy left eye and a slow limp in his back leg. Gray fur, patchy in places. He smelled bad and snored when he slept. But he was warm. At night, Luke would curl against his side and listen to the dog breathe, counting the inhales to fall asleep. Sometimes Max would whine. Luke would whisper, "It's okay." He wasn't sure if he was comforting Max or himself. The kennel was 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. Dirt floor, Wooden walls on three sides, wire mesh on the front. No insulation. Rain came through the corners. Wind bit through the cracks. In summer, the floor burned his skin. In winter, his toes turned purple. There was a blanket once. It got wet and never came back. The chain on his ankle was long enough to let him move in a circle, just enough to reach the water bowl and the food bowl. Sometimes there was food. Sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes it was wet dog food. Sometimes bread. Sometimes bones. He didn't ask questions. He ate quickly before Max could finish and try to share. The water was always cold. In winter, it froze overnight. Luke had learned to drink early in the day or wait for it to thaw. He spoke to Max every day, not with full conversations, just little things. Good boy. You're loud today. I had a dream. No one else ever spoke to him. He remembered vaguely the sound of a television once. Music, laughter, a door slamming. But those were things from another time, another place, a foggy before. The world outside the kennel was colorless, just a strip of grass and dirt. The fence blocked everything else. He couldn't see the street. He couldn't hear people unless they were yelling. The only time he saw faces was when the back door opened. Sometimes she brought food. Quiet, fast, no eye contact. A woman, blonde hair tied in a bun, pale hands. She never looked him in the eyes, never spoke. She slid the bowl in, turned, and left. Sometimes it was him. Boots on the deck, heavy steps. The chain rattled. Luke would freeze, stay still, breathe shallow. Once the man dragged him out of the kennel. Just once. It had been raining. Luke was shivering. The man had said something like, "You want to be treated like a dog, then act like one." He'd made Luke crawl on the wet grass, bark, lick the ground, then hit him when he stopped. Luke didn't cry. That was the rule. Crying made it worse. After that, he learned to be smaller, quieter. He stopped humming to himself. He stopped whispering stories. He stopped dreaming out loud. He didn't remember his name. Sometimes in the deepest part of night, he would try to remember what someone had called him once, a word soft and kind that meant you, but it never came back. He called himself boy in his head. The boy. This boy. It was easier that way, simpler, safer. When he had to go to the bathroom, he dug a hole in the corner. Max used the same one. It was the rule. There were no wipes, no water to wash, just dirt and the smell and the flies. One day a squirrel came close to the kennel. Luke watched it for an hour. Its tail flicked like a ribbon. It was fast, free. He wondered if it had ever been cold, if it knew what it meant to be hungry for so long, your stomach stopped hurting and just felt gone. He drew pictures in the dirt when the chain allowed it. Mostly houses, sometimes a school bus. Once, a dog with wings. Rain washed them away. He once tried to write letters, HELP in crooked lines, but they were gone before anyone saw. Or maybe someone saw and didn't know what to do. He'd stopped trying. Sometimes he wondered if the people on the other side of the fence heard him, if they saw his breath in the winter air, if they wondered why a child would be barefoot in December. But no one ever came. Once he thought he heard footsteps. A dog barked. Muffin, the one that walked by every day with the woman in the red coat. He remembered her voice, not the words, just the rhythm. Warm, awake. He pressed his face against the wire. The woman didn't look his way. After a while, he stopped waiting. There was a sound Luke made when he woke up some mornings, a soft sigh, almost a whisper. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was just breath, a release, a survival sound. He had one dream that kept coming back. In it, he was in a room, bright, warm, a couch, a television. Someone gave him a cup of cocoa. He didn't know what cocoa tasted like, but he'd seen it in books once, when books were still things he could touch. In the dream, no one yelled. No one looked away. And Max had two good eyes. He would always wake up before drinking the cocoa. Always. That morning, when the door creaked open and Boots stepped onto the porch, Luke didn't expect anything different. He pulled the hoodie tighter around his knees. Max shifted beside him, grumbling low in his throat. But this time, the Boots didn't turn away. They got closer. The gate squealed. The man had a voice Luke didn't recognize. "Hey, son, you okay?" Luke didn't move. The voice again, quieter. "You hurt?" The light from the flashlight hit his eyes. He blinked once. Then for the first time in months, maybe longer, he felt something different. Not hope, not fear, just confusion. He didn't know what to do when someone saw him. Doris Kincaid remembered the sound of the chain before she knew what it was. At the time, she thought it was a loose gutter or maybe a wind chime someone forgot to take down. It clanged softly on cold mornings in a rhythm that was too irregular to notice, unless you were listening for it. She never was. Doris had lived on Walnut Street for 34 years. She watched houses go up, watched families move in, watched children grow. Hers had moved away years ago. California, Illinois, Texas. She kept to herself, took care of her poodle, Muffin, and baked pies for the church social twice a month. She wasn't nosy. That was important to her. Being nosy was considered rude in Yadkinsville. People had their own problems. You didn't just walk up and ask questions. You minded your business and let others do the same. That's what she told herself the day she saw the boy. It had been cold, late November, a wind that cut through her coat. She'd taken Muffin for her usual walk, looping around the block and passing the Harper house like always. She barely noticed the backyard most days, but that morning something had caught her eye. Movement. Behind the fence, through a narrow gap between the panels. Just for a second, a small figure, a bare shoulder, thin, pale, then gone. She'd stopped walking. Muffin had tugged forward, but Doris just stood there, staring at the fence. She thought, was that a child? Then, why would a child be outside with no shirt in this weather? Then, maybe I imagined it. She looked around. No one else was outside. No one else saw. She told herself it wasn't her place. She didn't know the family well. Maybe the child had slipped out for a second. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't her business. She kept walking. 2 days later, she brought it up to her neighbor, Linda, just in passing. "You ever see that boy at the Harpers? Seems awful quiet over there." Linda shook her head. "Don't think they have kids." Doris paused. "You sure?" Linda shrugged. "I mean, I've never seen one. Jacob doesn't seem like the fatherly type, does he?" They both laughed, lightly, nervously. Then they moved on to safer topics: cranberry sauce, grandkids, the cold front coming in. No one called. No one knocked. No one asked again. John Morris, the mailman, had delivered to the Harpers for 5 years. He knew their mail was sparse, bills mostly, no Christmas cards, no school flyers, no toy catalogs. He figured they were private, or childless, or both. One afternoon, he left a package on the porch, something from a hardware store. As he turned to leave, he heard a sound, not from inside the house, from around back. It was sharp, a bark. Then a louder noise, something like a slam. Then silence. He paused. His hand hovered near his radio. Then he lowered it. "Probably just the dog," he mumbled. "None of my business." He didn't think about it again, not until the news broke. Then he couldn't stop. There were others too. Jason, the high school kid who mowed lawns during the summer. He'd done the Harper's yard once, said the man watched him from the porch, never said thank you, told him not to go near the backyard, left the money in an envelope. He'd heard whining coming from behind the fence, thought it was a sick dog, told his mom. She told him not to take that house again. "That man gives me the creeps," she said, but she never told anyone else. And so the whispers stayed whispers. The instincts were brushed off. The small alarms went unanswered. Because in Yadkinsville, you didn't accuse neighbors. You didn't stir up drama. You didn't overstep. Not unless you had proof. Not unless you wanted to be the one everyone looked at funny in church. There was safety in silence, dignity in distance, until one day there wasn't. When the news broke, when the sirens came, when the flashing lights filled the street and the boy was carried out in the arms of a man who looked as stunned as everyone else, people came out of their houses. They stood on sidewalks, in slippers, holding mugs of coffee. They asked each other, "Did you know? Did you ever see him? How could this happen here?" Doris stood on her porch that morning, gripping the railing. She watched as paramedics wrapped the boy in a blanket. She saw the outline of his face, thin, gray, eyes that didn't blink. And she thought about that day in November, that flash of skin, that gut feeling she'd ignored. She said nothing. Inside, her pie burned in the oven. Sergeant Thomas McAllister had been a cop for 32 years. He'd worked traffic, narcotics, even 2 years in Vice before settling back in his hometown. He liked Yadkinsville. It was quiet, predictable, boring in the best ways. He carried a worn leather notebook in his shirt pocket, habit from the old days before body cams and automated reports. On the second page, he kept a list titled "Ones That Stick." There were only 4 names on it. Now there was a 5th. Luke Harper. The day after the boy was found, McAllister sat in the squad room staring at a blank incident report. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He didn't know how to begin. Discovered minor male inside canine enclosure didn't feel like enough. The door to the Harper house had been unlocked when backup arrived. The kitchen was spotless. Countertops gleamed. No dishes in the sink. A candle still flickered on the island. Lavender vanilla. Everything was quiet, still, as if the house had been scrubbed clean of sound. There were no family photos. None. Not on the walls, not on the fridge, not on the mantle. No baby pictures, no drawings, no handprints in paint. The living room had 2 chairs, no couch. The TV remote sat dead center on the coffee table, parallel with the edge. There was 1 coffee mug in the sink, 1 toothbrush in the bathroom. In the hallway closet, they found a folded sleeping bag, no bedding, no toys. It was like the house had been staged for a showing, except for one door, the basement. It was locked. When they pried it open, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Mold, dampness, faint ammonia. No stairs, just a ladder descending into darkness. At the bottom, a dirt floor, old paint cans, a bucket with a cracked rim. A single bare bulb hung from a wire, too high to reach. In the corner, a dog bed, torn. Beside it, a collar, too big for Max, too small for a full-grown dog. They didn't say anything at first. No one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. McAllister took photographs, each corner, each crack. He held the camera steady, but his fingers itched. The kind of itch that didn't go away. Back at the station, they started to build a case, except there wasn't much to build. No school records, no doctor visits, no social services reports. Luke Harper did not exist. Not on paper, anyway. There had been a birth certificate filed in Virginia, but it hadn't been updated since he was 6 months old. No shots, no checkups, no kindergarten registration. The Harpers had disappeared from every system. Legally, they'd done nothing wrong until now. That's what made McAllister furious. There had been signs. People had noticed things. But nothing crossed the threshold of probable cause. No one had knocked on that door, not once. Because there wasn't enough reason. Because the law didn't allow it. He remembered a call from 2 years ago. Someone had reported a dog barking excessively, might be neglected. He'd sent a deputy to check. The deputy walked the perimeter, saw Max through the kennel, noted that the animal had water, report filed, case closed. No mention of a second figure in the shadows. McAllister hadn't thought about it until now. The Harpers had built their life around silence, around compliance. Their lawn was mowed, their garbage was taken out on time. No drugs, no domestic disturbances. They didn't raise red flags. They didn't raise any flags at all. That's what made it so easy. In interviews, Monica Harper said little. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, fingers white from pressure. "He doesn't like being indoors," she said once. When asked why, she shrugged. Jacob said the fresh air was good for him. When asked if she fed him, she nodded. "We gave him food. Sometimes he didn't eat it." She never said the boy's name. Jacob Harper refused to speak without a lawyer. When asked if he understood the charges, he nodded once. When shown photos of the kennel, he blinked. When asked if he thought what he'd done was wrong, he said, "I did what I thought was right." That was all. McAllister watched the footage from the body camera again and again. The flashlight beam, the boy's face. That moment, tiny, nearly imperceptible, when the boy flinched at kindness. He thought about how a child could live among hundreds of people and never be seen. Not really. He thought about the chain, the lock, the silence. "The law only works," he wrote later in his notebook, "if someone dares to knock on the door that no one opens. And in this town, no one ever knocked." Monica Harper sat across from the investigator in a quiet room with beige walls and a ticking clock. The air smelled faintly of printer ink and hand sanitizer. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her knees pressed tightly together, like a schoolgirl waiting to be scolded. She wore no makeup. Her sweater had a small stain near the hem. Soup, maybe. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was flat, measured, careful. "We didn't hurt him. No one had asked if they did. We fed him. We kept him warm." The agent across from her, Dana Kellerman, Social Crimes Division, didn't respond. She let the silence settle. Monica glanced down, then added, "He liked the dog. He was never afraid." "What's his name?" Dana asked. Monica blinked. "What?" "Your son. What's his name?" A pause. A too long pause. "Luke," she said finally. The word landed like a mistake. Jacob Harper didn't speak for 3 days. His lawyer advised silence, and he followed it like scripture. He sat with his arms crossed, eyes half-lidded, posture straight. His answers, when they came, were clipped and deliberate. I served 2 tours. I kept my home secure. I enforced discipline. That was the word he came back to, again and again. Discipline. When shown photos of the kennel, he didn't flinch. He studied them the way someone might inspect blueprints. He knew the rule, he said. What rules? No lying, no stealing, no talking back. How did he break the rules? He breathed loud at night, kicked the dog bowl once, bit Monica. There was no police record of the incident, no medical record, nothing documented. Jacob tapped the table. People raise soft kids now, spoiled, weak. That boy, he had food, shelter, air. That's more than I got growing up. When asked if he believed the treatment was fair, he shrugged. I could have done worse. Monica's story was different, softer, wrapped in layers of excuses. He wasn't normal, she whispered once. In what way? He didn't talk like other kids, didn't sleep right, always watching, always waiting, like he was planning something. She rubbed her arms as if the room had turned cold. Jacob said he needed structure, that the world wouldn't baby him. I believe that. Did you ever hold him? A pause. Yes, when he was little. When did you stop? Another pause. I don't remember. McAllister watched the interviews from the other side of the glass. He'd seen criminals before. Abusers. Addicts. People who snapped. People who cried. The Harpers didn't cry. They didn't yell. They didn't deny. They explained, with the calm, clear tone of people discussing property lines or tax codes. Like this wasn't cruelty, just correction. Like the boy had failed, not them. The psychologist assigned to Luke's case called it learned silence. He doesn't expect response, she said. He doesn't anticipate kindness. It doesn't register. She'd spent hours with him, drawing, simple games, flashcards. He doesn't speak unless prompted, and even then it's minimal. She showed McAllister one of Luke's drawings. A square, 4 lines, a box. Inside it, a stick figure with a circle for a head. Outside the box, a dog. That was it. No faces, no words. When asked who the figure was, Luke had said, him, not me, just him. Legally, the Harpers were being charged with felony child abuse, neglect, unlawful confinement. The prosecutors debated whether it qualified as torture. There were complications, no previous reports, no medical records. Luke had no broken bones, no visible bruises, just malnutrition, dehydration, mild hypothermia, skin abrasions from the chain. Not enough for torture, the defense would argue. Not enough? McAllister nearly broke his pencil hearing it. He thought about the cold ground, the frozen water bowl, the smell. He thought about how Luke flinched when offered a blanket. He thought about the collar. He wrote one word in his notebook. Enough. In court, Jacob stood like a soldier, shoulders back, chin raised. He pled not guilty. Monica pled guilty. She did not make eye contact with her husband. Their attorneys painted a picture of misguided discipline, of cultural values, of mental strain due to military service. They said things like they were doing their best. They believed it was appropriate. They didn't know the long-term effects. The jury watched video clips, listened to recordings, heard Luke's whisper on tape. I'm sorry I took the bread. Saw photos of his legs, thin as sticks. The defense argued he was fed, that he wasn't locked in all day, that the chain was a precaution. The prosecution showed the chain marks. The jury didn't speak, just stared. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had begun to gather. Not large, but enough. Signs appeared. Justice for Luke. Children aren't dogs. Silence is complicity. One man held a photo of a child, his own son, next to a dog bowl with the caption, "Would you know the difference?" McAllister stayed late that night, alone in his car, watching people leave in silence. He didn't feel justice. He felt tired. He thought of the word discipline and how it had been twisted, flattened, bent to fit cruelty. He wondered how many others used it the same way. The room was small, painted light blue, with soft lighting that never buzzed or flickered. A single bed sat in the corner with white sheets neatly tucked. There was a desk, a chair, and a box of crayons on top. The window looked out onto a parking lot, but someone had taped a drawing of a tree to the glass. Green leaves, a brown trunk, a blue sky behind it. Luke didn't touch it. He sat on the bed back straight, hands in his lap. He didn't move much, didn't fidget. He blinked slowly, eyes scanning the corners of the room, as if waiting for something to happen. Something loud or sharp or sudden, but nothing did. The social worker, Emily Vance, kept her voice low. She never stood too close, never blocked the doorway. She placed a water bottle on the nightstand. "You can drink whenever you want, okay?" Luke looked at it, didn't reach. "It's yours." Still nothing. Emily backed away, gave him space. When she came back later that afternoon, the water was untouched. So was the sandwich. So was the blanket. He hadn't moved. He sat in that same position, knees slightly bent, toes pointed in, hands folded neatly in his lap, like he was waiting for orders. On the third day he spoke. One word. No. Emily had asked if he wanted to go outside. Just for a minute. The sun was out. The other kids were playing. Luke looked toward the door, then back at his hands. No. It wasn't defiant. It was protective. Like no was the only thing he had left. That night, one of the nurses, Rosa, tried a different approach. She brought in Max, not the real Max, he was still in quarantine, but a dog that looked similar, older, slow, gentle. Luke's eyes followed the animal as it entered the room. The dog sniffed the air, wagged its tail once, then curled into the corner of the room and lay down. Luke got off the bed, walked slowly, sat beside the dog, didn't touch it, just sat. It was the first time anyone had seen him change position without being told. So in the following days, he began to draw, not pictures, shapes, boxes, circles, lines that repeated over and over. He used only black. Emily gave him green. He ignored it. Gave him red. Ignored that too. One day he filled the entire page with short straight lines, vertical, evenly spaced. Emily asked, "What is it?" He shrugged, then said almost too soft to hear, "Rain." He ate very little. He took food but held it in his hands for a long time before chewing. Sometimes he sniffed it. Sometimes he pulled off the crust and placed it carefully on the side of the plate, like it might be taken and weighed later. He never asked for seconds. If food fell on the floor, he wouldn't eat it. Not because it was dirty, because he thought it was no longer his. Once, a staff member offered him a cookie. Luke took it, held it, then walked to the trash and dropped it in. When asked why, he said, "That's what happens when you're greedy." He didn't cry, not when he tripped over a chair, not when he spilled water, not even when he had a nightmare and woke up gasping for air. He didn't cry. He apologized, over and over. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I won't do it again." The staff wrote notes, documented patterns, scheduled trauma counseling. They called it hypercompliance, a common trait in abused children. But common didn't mean less horrifying. A therapist showed him a picture of a house and asked, "Where do you sleep?" Luke pointed to the roof. She asked, "Where's your mom?" He looked at the door, then went silent. Later, when alone, he took a crayon and scribbled over the face of the therapist on the pamphlet she left behind. Black lines, crossed out eyes. He didn't say why. One evening, while Emily was gathering laundry from the rooms, she passed by Luke's door and noticed something strange. The room was empty. Luke was not in bed, not at the desk, not in the corner. She panicked, called his name. Then she saw it, beneath the bed. He had crawled under, curled in a tight ball, arms around his knees. Emily crouched, spoke softly. "Luke, you okay?" He didn't answer, but he didn't flinch, didn't hide. That was something. They placed a nightlight in his room. He unplugged it every morning, plugged it back in every night. No one told him to. He began stacking his shoes near the door, perfectly aligned. His toothbrush was always laid flat, handle pointing east. Order made him calm. Silence made him feel safe. They didn't push. The healing had to come slow, slower than they wanted, faster than he could understand. One day McAllister came to visit, just to see. He didn't wear his uniform. He brought a bag of dog treats. For Max, he said, though Max hadn't been clear to return. Emily led him to the observation room. Behind the glass, Luke was sitting at the table, drawing. This time he used two crayons, black and blue. The picture showed a fence, tall, with a crack running down the middle. Behind it, a stick figure. No face. In front, a man with a square hat, like a cop's cap. A dog stood beside him. McAllister stared at the drawing for a long time. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't need to. He just stood there watching a boy who had no words for what happened. Only lines. Only silence. Only rain. The courtroom was colder than it should have been. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled like copier toner and coffee that had been reheated too many times. It was a small room, old wood panels and blue carpet, seats worn down by years of parking tickets, custody hearings, petty theft. Now it held the trial of Jacob and Monica Harper. No cameras were allowed, no national news crew, just local journalists in the back row and a few neighbors who hadn't moved away yet. Outside, protest signs leaned against trash cans. A few said things like, "Justice for Luke." Most were vague. "Protect the innocent." "Children deserve better." No one chanted. There was no marching, just silence. Ha ha ha. Jacob Harper sat straight, hands folded. No tie, just a plain shirt with sleeves rolled to the forearm. He didn't look at anyone. Monica sat 2 chairs down, separated by both their attorneys and the growing space between them. She looked thinner than the last time McAllister had seen her. Hair pulled back tight, skin pale. She wept once. Not when the charges were read, not when the prosecutor said the word kennel, but when someone said the word mother. And the judge was efficient, neutral, the kind of man who had heard enough stories to know there were always two sides, and both were ugly. He asked the gallery to remain quiet. He didn't need to. No one made a sound. The prosecutor began with photographs. The kennel, the chain, the bowl, then Luke. Not pictures of injuries. There weren't many. Just the eyes. Wide, sunken, unmoving. The jury shifted. One woman crossed her arms tight across her chest. A man in the front row looked down and didn't look up again. The defense didn't deny the photos. They offered context. They used words like discipline, control, non-traditional parenting. They showed Jacob's military record, his medals, his discharge papers. They spoke about PTSD, about reintegration, about a system that failed veterans. They spoke about Monica's isolation, her anxiety, her obedience. They showed grocery receipts, proof of food purchases. They presented Max's veterinary records, clean, up to date. They said Luke was never beaten. They said he never asked for help. They said it wasn't ideal, but it wasn't criminal. So the therapist testified next. She spoke gently, carefully. Luke exhibits signs of prolonged psychological trauma. He demonstrates hypercompliance, distrust of kindness, and significant emotional dissociation. He doesn't cry because he was taught not to. She showed drawings, the fence, the collar, the man without a face, the boy behind bars. The jury stared. No one asked questions. Luke didn't appear in court. His presence would have been too disruptive, the doctor said. Instead, his words were read aloud. A simple letter, written in blocky letters, carefully spaced. Dear Judge, I don't want anyone else to be scared like me. I don't want to sleep outside anymore. I don't want to be quiet forever. Please stop them. Please. Luke. No one moved for a full 30 seconds after the letter ended. Then the judge cleared his throat. The trial continued. During a recess, McAllister stepped outside. He watched people shuffle past the courthouse. Grocery bags, cell phones. A man in a suit smoking under the no smoking sign. Life went on. The world didn't stop. Not for Luke. Not for justice. Not for anything. Closing arguments came quickly. The prosecution didn't yell. They didn't need to. They simply laid it out. A child was kept in a cage. Not for hours, not for days, for months. He was chained, fed irregularly, denied school, love, and human contact. There is no context that makes that right. There is no circumstance that makes that legal. There is no discipline in dehumanization. The defense asked for mercy. These are not monsters. These are damaged people. They didn't know how to parent. They tried the only way they knew. Then it went to the jury. They deliberated for 3 hours. Jacob Harper was found guilty on all counts. 18 years, no parole for the first 10. Monica Harper pled guilty to lesser charges, 5 years, eligible for parole in 2. She cried again when the sentence was read. Jacob didn't blink. Outside, no one cheered. There were no headlines, no crowds, just McAllister standing on the sidewalk, watching as the Harpers were led out in cuffs. He thought about the chain, the dog bowl, the boy in the kennel, the town that never asked, the laws that needed proof, the silence that let it happen. He didn't feel relief. He felt too late. The new house had no fence. There was a small porch with chipped white railings, a swing that creaked when the wind blew, and a mailbox that still bore the name McAllister in faded black letters. The yard wasn't perfect. The grass grew unevenly. Dandelions popped up in the spring, but it was open. Luke stood at the edge of the driveway the day he arrived, clutching a small paper bag with his name written in marker. Inside, two drawings, a crayon, and the collar from Max. McAllister didn't rush him. He simply said, "Come on in when you're ready," then turned and walked through the front door. It took Luke 6 minutes to follow. He counted them. The room he was given was upstairs. A real bed, soft mattress, blue sheets, a pillow that smelled like lavender detergent. On the nightstand, a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. On the wall, a small bookshelf with 4 titles: Charlotte's Web, Where the Red Fern Grows, Old Yeller, and The Secret Garden. He didn't touch them, not yet. Instead, he placed the paper bag in the drawer, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. Dinner that night was spaghetti. Luke stared at it for 3 full minutes before touching the fork. He ate slowly, chewing each bite as if someone might take it away mid-mouth. Ellen, McAllister's wife, didn't comment. She simply passed him a piece of garlic bread. He didn't eat it, but he didn't throw it away either. Progress. Max came 3 days later. Not the original Max. The old dog had passed quietly in his sleep during the trial. Luke hadn't been told until weeks after. This new Max was younger, leaner, but had the same spotted fur and tilted head. Luke didn't say anything when he saw him. He just sat down on the kitchen floor and let the dog sniff his hands, then his face, then curl up at his feet. That night, Luke slept with one hand resting on Max's back. It was the first night he didn't check under the bed. McAllister wasn't much for conversation. He didn't ask questions, didn't push. He made breakfast every morning, eggs, toast, juice, said "morning, kid," and left a folded napkin beside Luke's plate. Sometimes there was a joke written on it, sometimes a riddle. Luke never laughed, but he always read it. And one day, he left a note back. Just one word: "Thanks." McAllister didn't mention it, just nodded once and poured more coffee. Ellen took him to the library. They signed up for a card. He picked the same 4 books every time and stacked them neatly by his bed. He never read aloud, but late at night the hallway light would cast a faint glow through the crack under his door. And if you walked close enough, you could hear pages turning, steady, even, safe. At school, Luke sat in the back. He didn't raise his hand, didn't answer questions, but he watched, listened. He got perfect marks on spelling. When another boy offered him a high five, Luke flinched. The teacher noted it, didn't push, just smiled and moved on. Small steps. One afternoon, Ellen found Luke in the backyard, kneeling in the dirt. He was drawing again, not on paper, on the ground. A house, a dog, 3 stick figures. She didn't say anything, just knelt beside him and handed him a smooth stone for the roof. He placed it gently, then said, barely audible, "That's you." Spring came, then summer. Luke spoke more, in fragments. "Yes, please. I don't know. Can Max come too? The last one was for the beach. They said yes. He learned to make pancakes. He played checkers with McAllister on Sunday afternoons. He walked Max every evening, always using the same path, same pace. One day he took a different turn. When McAllister asked why, Luke shrugged. Wanted to see what was there. It was the first sign of curiosity, the first crack in the shell. On the one-year anniversary, McAllister brought home a small frame. Inside, the photo of Luke and Max taken at the park last fall. Luke looked at it for a long time, then asked, "Can it go in my room?" They hung it above the bookshelf. Later that night, McAllister passed by Luke's door and saw him standing on the bed, touching the frame lightly with his fingertips. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching, not to intrude, just to make sure the boy who once lived behind a fence knew he could sleep with the door open. 2 years later, Luke stood in front of a room full of children. Not many, maybe a dozen. Some fidgeted, some chewed on their sleeves. One rocked back and forth in his chair, eyes fixed on the floor. It was story hour at a group home in a neighboring town. Ellen had asked if Luke wanted to come with her. He didn't say yes right away, just nodded once later when no one was watching. Now he held a book in his lap, not reading yet, just holding. The kids looked at him. He looked back. Then he opened to the first page. His voice was quiet, flat at first but steady. The story was about a boy and his dog, how they found each other, how they didn't talk much at first, how they just stayed close, until one day the boy smiled. When Luke finished, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of story, but a small girl in the front row raised her hand. "Was that a true story?" she asked. Luke paused, then said, "Kind of." Outside, Ellen waited by the car. Luke climbed in, closed the door, buckled the seatbelt. They drove in silence for a while. Then he asked, "You think there are others?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes," she said. "They just haven't been seen yet." Luke nodded, looked out the window. The fields were green that day, the sky wide, no fences in sight. At home, he kept a list. Names he made up, just names, first names, written carefully in pencil. He called them the invisible kids. Sometimes he added a birthday beside a name, or a favorite food, or a place they might be hiding, not because he knew them, because he knew they could exist, because once he had too. He spoke more now, at school, at home, with Max. He asked questions. Some were small. "What's the capital of Montana? Do clouds ever fall?" Others were harder. "Why didn't anyone help sooner? Why didn't my mom stop him? Why didn't the neighbor knock?" McAllister answered when he could. Other times he said nothing, just sat beside him. Sometimes silence was the only honest thing left. One evening, Luke asked if they could drive down Walnut Street. McAllister hesitated, then nodded. They didn't stop, just passed by slowly. The Harper house had been sold. The white fence was gone, replaced by a chain-link one, lower, see-through. The yard had toys now, a swing set, a tricycle. Luke didn't say anything, but his hand rested on the window glass for a long time, then dropped back to his lap, on a fussen white in Aberdeen. Later that night, he asked if they could leave the door cracked open. "Just a little," McAllister said. "Of course." When he checked on him at midnight, Luke was asleep. one arm around Max, the other hand curled beneath the pillow, holding a folded scrap of paper. On it, a name. Not his own, someone else. Someone he might never meet, but might save someday, just by seeing. Years from now, people would tell Luke he was brave, that he survived, that he gave them hope. He'd nod quietly. But what he'd remember most wasn't the courtroom, wasn't the cage, wasn't even the cold. What he'd remember most was the day someone saw him, really saw him, and didn't look away. And how that moment was enough to begin again, not to forget, not to erase, but to begin. Somewhere quieter, somewhere without chains, somewhere with a door left open and a light left on. You've seen a kid like him before, maybe not in a kennel, maybe not with a chain on his ankle, but you've seen one. At the grocery store, standing too close to his mother's shopping cart, eyes wide, shoulders tense. On the bus, sitting alone, always in the same seat, never looking up. At church, wearing long sleeves in July. In your neighborhood, at your school, across the street, you saw something, you felt something, and maybe you told yourself not to assume, not to intrude, not to overstep. You were probably right, until you weren't. No one wants to believe they walked past a cage and didn't stop. No one wants to admit they heard something and turned up the volume on the TV instead. No one wants to feel complicit in silence. But silence is never neutral. Silence votes. It chooses the bigger voice, and sometimes that voice belongs to the abuser. Sorry. There are children who hide in plain sight, children who don't know they're allowed to speak, children who think hunger is their fault, children who apologize when you offer them kindness. They don't always cry, they don't always scream, they don't always ask for help. Sometimes they just watch, they wait, and when you look at them, they look away, because that's what they've been taught. To be invisible, to be small, to be quiet, to survive. Luke was lucky. Someone saw him, really saw him. Not just a flash through the fence, not just a whisper behind the wall. Someone stepped closer, asked again, opened the gate. But not all kids have a McAllister. Not all kids have a Max. Not all kids make it out. Some stay behind the fence their whole lives, not in cages, not in basements, but in patterns, in trauma, in silence that never learned how to break. So what can you do? You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to carry anyone out of the dark, but you can notice, you can ask, you can knock on the door. And if it opens, you can say, I see you. And if it doesn't, you can try again. Because maybe, just maybe, the next Luke is watching you from the other side of the fence. Sometimes the worst kind of harm doesn't come from anger or hate. It comes from silence, from closed curtains, from the eyes that look away. There are children in every town, every neighborhood, who are never really seen, not because they're hidden, but because no one thinks to look. So the question is, have you ever noticed something that didn't feel right and walked away? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a moment that still lingers in your mind? We'd love to hear your voice. And if you'd like to hear more real human stories like this, stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe to our channel. Your attention can be the difference. Sometimes just listening is the first step towards seeing.